Setbacks are temporary, but comebacks, they are legendary. Welcome back to the PSI Effect, where we pause, shift, and ignite purpose that speaks louder than your past. This is Neug, and together with Franky, we're your hosts in this space, and your comeback starts now. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the PSI Effect podcast. Excited that you are here with us today, our seasoned listeners, and those of you who are newbies. Glad to have you here. We're going to be talking about a topic today that I know that you all can all relate to, something that we have all waited for at one point or another, and we're going to jump into that. But before we do, just want to ask you to continue to do what you have been doing, is like and subscribe and follow us on all the socials. And at the end of this podcast, Franky will kindly tell you where you can find us. But we really appreciate you being here. And as always, before we get started, Franky gives us a little insight onto what's going on. And I will tell you, brother, I am living in 90-degree weather today. And this is one of those days where a brother can definitely get his tan on.
Yeah, we've talked about this. You and you being the Michigan transplant, I would have imagined that you were more acclimated to the cooler weather. I love the cooler temperatures. Hot summertime is great to be outside, but man, let's keep it real. You could be butt naked and still be sweltering hot. When it's cold, you can eventually get enough layers on where you're going to warm up. So that's my stance on the hot versus cold. But, the nice hot weather is good every once in a while.
You are speaking the truth there, because definitely had the layers on back in the winter up north, for sure. Well, let's just jump in, man, because, I know the folks are probably curious about what I was talking about. There's something that we've all at one point or another waited for, and some of us are probably still waiting for it. And that something just happens to be someday.
Talk about it.
We're always waiting for someday. There's some reason why we're putting things off, or we putting something off until we feel like the stars are aligned or the universe is just right to where we can jump in and get that one thing done. We make excuses after excuses after excuses. And they're always the same, right? The excuse is always the same. I'll do it when things slow down, or I'll do it when I have a extra few minutes, or I'll start someday. I'll start tomorrow, right? It's always the same.
Dude, you're exactly right. It's a vicious cycle that we can find ourselves in. And when we talk about that someday, I think about daydreaming, because that's about as much substance as someday tends to have for us. It gives us almost like a little bit of a safety blanket, or a little security blanket to be able to say someday, because I can say that I'm thinking about it. I'm putting some thought into it, but I'm being very non-committal as to when it's actually going to go down, when this thing is actually going to happen, when I'm actually going to take this step, make this change, complete this project. And it can be very debilitating if we're trying to make progress, especially if we've had a setback and, we're trying to go through the pause, shift, and ignite stages to get there. Someday can be our worst enemy.
Yeah. And, I think a lot of times we treat someday as this mystical 8th day of the week or something. It's in the weekday rotation, someday, that never seems to come. And so you're right, so you talk about commitments. If that plan that you have, or if that idea to accomplish something, if it's not concrete, if it's not on a calendar, if you haven't written it down, if you haven't made that commitment, as you mentioned, to it, then it's just something that just kind of hangs out there, just kind of floats out there in the ether. And, we know what happens with ether, right? It just kind of
evaporates,
right?
Yeah.
It just disappears. And so that perfect timing that we're waiting on is really just a form of procrastination, wouldn't you say?
I would. When we're sitting there thinking about someday, I made the analogy to daydreaming. Some people may argue that, sitting there thinking about, well, someday I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. Some people may argue that we are exercising visualization. And we've talked in the past about how important it is for us to visualize success and visualize what the future could look like or visualize the outcome that we're looking for. And that visualization can help power us on our way to actually achieving it. So, what's your thoughts on how this notion of someday differs from this notion of visualization that we've talked about in the past?
Well, I think we have to be careful with that, right? Because we can visualize, which I'm all about that, right?
Mm.
Seeing things happen and at some future point, seeing yourself in situations that materialize for you. I'm all about that. But I think sometimes what we can do is just, visualize ourselves into a point of just, like I said, procrastinating. For instance, like you're a runner, right? I'm not the runner I used to be. Tomorrow, I'm going to get up and I'm going to run at 5 o'clock in the morning. Right. I can visualize that. I can daydream about that. And, you know, I can daydream about that for 7 days.
Mm.
Right. I can visualize it for 7 days. But until I have that action to physically get up and go make that run, it's just I think it's just me pushing off that someday into the ether, my procrastination about getting it done. So I think there's a fine line between, actually moving forward, actually, um, getting to that ignition point versus just remaining stuck, remaining stagnant in that daydream or that visualization step.
And it's interesting, you use that word stuck. And when I think about this, this someday syndrome that we're talking about, I don't visualize it or I don't see it as stuck. It feels more like hesitation to me, right? Because it feels like we've got all the things that we need to move forward. We can actually make progress, but for some reason we're not hitting that launch button to take the action. We know where we want to go. Like we said, we visualize till the cows come home, but we're holding back for some reason. I have a perfect example. I feel like I feel called out by this episode quite a bit because I have something that I've been procrastinating on. Like prime example, I have a big shed in my backyard where I keep my lawnmower and tools and outdoor power equipment and all that other good stuff. And it desperately needs to be repainted. I
Mm,
have I bought the paint. I've got all the supplies that I need, all the rollers and brushes and painter's tape and everything else to make it look nice and do well. And the someday I've been waiting on someday for probably about almost 6 months now.
mm.
I've got all the things to make the progress and achieve the goal, but something is keeping me from pushing that launch button so that I can start moving towards it.
Brother, you obviously didn't have that vision far enough into the future because you are living in that time of year where painting in 90-degree weather is probably not fun.
Oh, for sure. For sure. But see, right now you're giving me more emotional ammunition to not do what I need to do. So I don't know if you're pushing in the right direction here, Nuge. You might be pushing in the opposite direction of where I need to be going.
Probably so. Uh, but that just is a segue into, part of the research for this episode. There was a study done at the University of Scranton that says that 92% of the people who set goals never actually achieve them. So uh, I can imagine that that particular goal is probably part of that 92%, at least for a little while.
Mm.
I know that. we can wait and we can procrastinate and it can take us some time. And, sooner or later we'll have some, you know, some reason that will push us into the direction of accomplishing that goal that we want to accomplish. I think that we just kind of ebb and flow with that, over time. And and I can imagine that there are things that we have that we probably should have accomplished a long time ago that are still in that bucket of someday.
Yeah, and I think you touched on it a little bit already. Is we're waiting for perfection sometimes. If sometimes it feels like we're waiting for perfection. I know in this adventure of painting my shed, I've said, well, I need to wait for a better weather day. Well,
Hmm.
guess what? Had plenty of better weather days. Chose to do something else. It's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, this weather's nice. Let me sit on my deck and drink a beer. Or let me go cut the grass. Or let me just sit out here in my hammock and things like that. But we talk about waiting for perfection. We want the conditions to be just right because we've visualized what this success looks like. And we think that everything has to be just so for us to be able to get there. And if one thing is out of order, that's just further cause for us to kind of stay our hand and not launch, not do the thing that we need to do. But what we really have to remember is that we can't sacrifice better in the pursuit or the hope of perfection. If we're just waiting for perfection, we're never going to move.
Yeah, you're right, because especially if it's something that you want to take on that you've never done before, if
Hmm.
you don't have any experience in it, and you're waiting and you're waiting, and honestly, I think you get to a point where you don't really know what you're waiting for because you've not been in that space before,
Hmm.
right? So you really don't know what you're waiting for. You just maybe it's just the fear of failure, just the anxiety of the launch or something of that nature. Because, like you said, you're waiting on perfection, but there's a part of the outcome, I think, that is going to be made up as you go, because you just don't know what
Mm.
uh, what lies ahead, or you've never been in that environment or faced with those opportunities before.
And that makes sense because you think about when you start a project at work or, even a project around the house, you have an idea of what the end state looks like. But as you get going, let's say you're doing a remodel or renovating something in your house and you want to go, do something on the wall, but you didn't realize that there were pipes in the wall. So as you get started, you gain knowledge as you go that changes the path you need to take. And I think that's just further backup or further confirmation of what you're talking about, where we don't know what the whole path is going to look like. We need to be able to react to change. So trying to wait until everything is perfect and everything perfectly aligns is just an exercise in futility.
Absolutely. So then, this whole reason why we wait for that perfect moment, and we can call it, waiting, we can call it, daydreaming, we can call it procrastination. Um, is it because we're lazy?
Hmm. I think the answer to that is that it depends. I think so. Going back to my confession that this podcast episode has turned into about my painting of my shed, some of it, sometimes I was like, man, I just don't feel like doing that. And I would chalk that up to me being lazy. But then there are other times where it's like, all right, well, something else has come up, or this is not that high a priority. So there could be instances where our procrastination is due to laziness, but um, more so, I think there may be some emotional states tied in there that could be staying our hand, especially if we're talking about, there may not be emotions. I love my shed, but I'm not emotionally attached to my shed. But things like I want to, learn a new sport. I want to try to learn a new skill. I want to try to get a new role in my job. There's risk and vulnerability involved in those things. And I think sometimes the emotions associated with the risk and vulnerability tied to those actions we want to take are huge contributors to how much we procrastinate on it.
I would agree with you. And, you touch on something. We talk about fear. And, God knows I wish that that was something that never entered into any of our psyche, just
Mm,
fear and anxiety, because I think that that really stops a lot of folk from doing things that they would really like to do and really having some phenomenal life-changing events happen for them.
mhm,
Um, and quite possibly some of those life-changing events are things that they, or that we've thought about, we've dreamt about, that we've visualized, as you say. But the fear, the anxiety, the self-doubt keep us from doing things. And it could
mhm,
be something very simple too. I think about this, like, if you are trying to, let's just say you're trying to launch a business, and you don't have all of the tools that you think you need to launch this business. And let's say you get invited out to dinner or to lunch with one of your friends, and you're like, oh, well, I really gotta do this and I really gotta do that. And just think about, if you had gone to that lunch, if maybe your friend said something that sparked something in you to act in a certain ways, maybe just reinforced something that you had been thinking. Maybe
mhm.
there's someone else that joins the lunch that has a little bit of experience in an area that you need, that could give you a few golden nuggets to help push you in the direction that you want to go. And so I think that we give up on opportunities like that, um, really unconsciously. But when you look at it, sometimes when you're nudged in a certain direction to do a certain thing, there's a reason for that.
Mhm.
And I think that sometimes we ignore that and we lose out or we miss out, which further pushes us into that, you know, I'm going to wait until the situation is perfect.
Yeah, and I think that ties directly back to what you mentioned about fear. Fear is a powerful response. It is a powerful place in our minds. There's a movie called Dune. They just recently remade it, but I was
Mm,
introduced to it back in the original sci-fi Dune movie
mhm,
back in the 1980s. It was on
mhm.
laser disc when I watched it. That's how old. That's how old that thing is, right? But
Right.
there was a scene in the movie where one of the main characters was doing something, and the person that was putting him through it told him, "Fear is the mind killer." Fear is the mind killer. I think that's very true today. Fear can cloud our judgment. It can make us doubt ourselves. It can make us want to make sure that we've mitigated every single risk that there could ever be, just so we don't encounter danger. And I think we've shared this acronym on here before, fear, FEAR, forget everything and run, or face everything and rise. We have to be able to overcome that fear if we want to see any sort of forward progression, because everything we want, everything that we're after, guess what? It's going to be on the other side of something that we're afraid of.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you can get past that fear, if you can eliminate that fear, whatever it is, whether it's looking foolish or failure or what have you, if you can get past that, then honestly, I think the perfect time becomes a non-issue,
Right.
right? It just becomes a non-issue. There
Mhm.
is no time if you can get past that fear, because then your time, I believe, becomes now, right? If you can get past that. And so uh I know it's easier said than done, because Lord knows, through the years, there have been times that I have been afraid to make a leap, and have had to overcome that. And sometimes, you're forced into a situation where you have to act, and you get to
Mhm.
the other side and you're like, "Oh, what was I waiting on? What was
Right.
I afraid of?" Right?
Right.
So, if you can get to a point where you can eliminate that fear, and maybe we can have an episode down the road on this where we have a professional uh, therapist or neurologist or someone who can give us a little bit more, a little deeper insight into that fear and why it causes us to wait.
Mhm. So fear comes in a lot of different flavors too. I mean, it can manifest in a lot of different ways. But when it comes to us going after goals and taking action to get to the new places that we want to be, to rise on purpose, what do you think people are afraid of the most across the board?
Mm, I think I think people are afraid to fail.
Yes.
I think people are afraid to fail. And there's a part of me that think that we are sometimes afraid to succeed.
Mm,
I think that we live in a place, and again, I am not a professional. This is just coming out of the caverns of Nuge's mind here. I think that we live in a place for so long. We live in a state for so long that it becomes so comfortable that failure is an issue for us and success is an issue for us. And
mm.
so we're caught on that double-edged sword of, which side of the spectrum that we want to live on. And I think that dichotomy just puts us in a place where, now we're really challenged because we got this mental tug of war going. So, um, but all in all, I would say is definitely fear.
So yeah, you are preaching right now in terms of, that fear of failure and fear of success. And I think the core piece that ties the two ends of that spectrum together is this notion of perfectionism, chasing perfection. It's like, all right, I'm afraid to fail because I didn't hit the mark of the perfect outcome that I had envisioned. I'm also afraid to succeed because the success that I actually achieve may not be that perfect victory that I had envisioned. So
Hmm.
chasing this notion of perfect, I think, is to a certain extent crippling us. It is perfection is not, I'm not going to say perfection is a bad thing, but we have to understand what perfection is, right? So, perfection is a goal. It is it's a motivational aspiration that is not achievable because there's nothing that we can do that is perfect. I'm going to go out on a limb and say there's nothing we can do that is perfect, but we can still have that as a motivational aspiration, as a mark to shoot towards.
Yeah, and you talk about that, but the other question I have is, whose perfection are we chasing? Are we chasing
Facts.
perfection that society gives us, or that idea of perfection that society gives us?
Mhm.
What is perfection for me? Right? Maybe perfection for me is, I jumped in, I made it 7 days, and guess what? I succeeded in what I wanted to do.
Mhm.
you know so we have to be careful of that, and we also have to be cognizant of the fact that you know are things ever going to be 100% right? And that's I think what you alluded to when you said perfect, when you were talking
Mhm.
about perfection. Are things ever going to be 100% right? And I don't think so. I think life in general, at stages in our life, is going to be messy. Right? It's just going to be messy at different times in our life, and there are going to be things that we worry about, like the economy. It's
Right.
been unpredictable since the beginning of time.
Mhm.
And so if we're waiting for the economy to get to a certain point, well, chances are good we're never going to get there because the economy is so unpredictable. Right. So, and being tired, like, how many days a week are you not tired at one point in time or the day? Do you push through? Of course you do. Right. But those types of things are always going to be there.
Mhm.
That's never going to change. And so chasing after perfection, I think you first have to decide for yourself what that looks like for you, because definitely if you're chasing a perfection that belongs to somebody else, I think that that's going to be detrimental to your success.
Yeah. And I like the quote you shared with me as we were preparing for this episode, talking about waiting for the perfect moment. Waiting for the perfect moment is like fishing in a dry pond. So it's like, all right,
Mm,
well, why would it be like fishing in a dry pond? Well, the best way to catch the fish is if you can see them. So let me wait until the water's out of the way so I can see all the fish and catch them more
right,
easily,
right,
right? But if it's a dry
right.
pond, guess what? The fish are going to be gone. The fish are going to be dead. Cast your net now. Don't wait until it's a perfect conditions. If you've got some, directionally correct preparedness, start moving. What are you waiting for?
Yeah. And so, we've talked about some good things here so far, but now let's talk about, the cost of someday, the cost of waiting for someday. And, the first word that comes to mind for me is regret, right? At some
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
Um, and, I think that's very real. It's very emotional. It's
Hmm.
very, uh, life altering and can take someone out of, I think, a positive outlook instead of looking at the glass half full. That glass all of a sudden becomes half empty. What do you think about that?
Regret is heavy and very sticky. And what I mean by very sticky is once you have some regret, it is very hard to detach yourself from it. Very hard to detach yourself from it. Um, I mean, just I just look back over my life. I've lived a good while, but still, I still got some mileage left on me, and there's already things behind me. It's like, man, yeah, I got some regrets about some ways things went down, some things I did and did not do. But I will pose this as it comes to regret. It is a much easier pill to swallow to regret something that you did versus regretting something that you didn't do.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. That that changed the whole perspective when you
Mhm.
think about things that you didn't do. And, you know, I think that one point that we have to come to in all of this is, life is fragile
Very.
a- and there are no do-overs. So we can spend our time waiting, or we can decide to take some action and to do some things that we want to do,
Mhm.
especially if it's something that we feel like it's along the lines of our self-fulfillment, things that are going to bring us self-satisfaction, some things that may bring us joy, may bring us love, may bring us peace,
Mhm.
and just have a bunch of gratitude along the way. And so, I encourage our audience to think about that because you this life is once. Right, it's not like, you're gonna come to the end and then the following week you're gonna come back and you'll be able to try it again.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, I think that that might be a dark way of looking at it. It may be a harsh reality, but at the end of the day, the those things that are important to us, the things that we really would like to do in our life that we think bring us meaning, we got one shot to get it done.
Yeah, and if we just sit back and wait, someday may never come. And I do not want to be, you know, standing at the end of my journey walking this earth and look back with regret. I mean, that's got to be one of the worst feelings. So, I mean, just my fear of that regret is enough motivation for me to get my butt in gear.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, don't let your regret be because you didn't do something. If you're going to have regret, let it be because you didn't start as soon as you would have liked to, or as soon as you, had the idea, you still follow through, but maybe you're a late bloomer in the whole process, and that's fine. Um, Let that be your regret, not that you just failed to launch.
Yeah. And there may be regret that you did something and it didn't turn out the way that you wanted to. But the silver lining there is you learned something, you stretched, you grew, you collected data that's going to be valuable for you as you navigate and make future decisions to attain future goals.
So 80/20 rule, Frankie, when we talk about someday, what do you
Hmm.
think that means? What does that mean?
80/20 rule. So, in my mind, that's telling me that I don't have to have all the answers. If I can get about 80% there, if I feel like I've got about 80% of the picture, that should be enough for me to get started. And the remaining 20% can be figured out on the fly as I kind of gain experience and collect information.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. And we alluded to that when we were talking about perfection,
Hmm.
in that, um, you know, part of what you set out to do, you're going to make up as you go anyway, especially if it's something that you've not encountered before.
All right.
If it's a new idea, if it's a new practice, you know, there's going to be a percentage of that you just don't know when you start.
Right.
And so getting started 80%, I mean, that's a good, I'll take that 80%
Mhm.
and figure out the 20. And the thing is once you get started again, um, you could very easily encounter folks who have a better understanding of that
Mhm.
20% that you're looking for and can
Right.
help you along the way. So, um, the key takeaway here is, evaluate what you have and jump in.
Yeah, and I see this a lot in my professional spaces. So, one aspect of my professional life is that I'm a agile professional. Specifically, I help teams and organizations implement agile project management practices. So this is stuff like Scrum, where they're basically choosing a whole different methodology by which you govern how you get your work done, and everybody can see the benefit of it, when we're talking about it, talking through it. But then there's always this hesitation and trepidation to get started because they don't feel like they're 100% there or 100% ready. And the thing I'm always screaming from the hilltops is just go, just start, because by starting, you're going to make some progress forward. You may have some missteps, but you're going to learn and allow you to adapt and pivot and hone your craft so that as you're gaining that, closing the gap on that missing 20%, you're doing it with evidence-based practice, not assumptions that you think through your daydreaming or ideation.
Yeah, very, very, very good. I like that a lot. And so, that just kind of leads me into, um, how do you get started on something that you really want to accomplish, something that you feel is going to bring you, um, joy and meaning in your life. And I think the thing to do is to just start somewhere. We're talking about 80%. Maybe you're not even at the 80% yet. Maybe you're at 10% or 5%, but you're doing something and doing something every day to push you closer to achieving that start, or achieving that, I shouldn't say that start, because if you're doing something every day, you've already started,
Mhm.
but pushing you toward that 80%. So, I liken it to a writer where, if you want to write a book, you're not likely going to write the book in one day.
Mhm.
You're going to write it, chapters at a time. And, maybe you're going to write it paragraphs at a time. And I remember listening to this lady a while back, something that I came across on YouTube, and was talking about getting started. And one of the things that she was talking about was her challenge in writing this book. And she said, she thought about it. She was having a real struggle at home writing this book, and she thought about her days in college and when she was at the library, how productive that she was. And so she decided to change her environment and go to the library. And then she was just sitting there writing for hours. And so
Mm.
maybe that's something that you have to do is change your environment, change the way you're looking at things in order to help you move forward.
Yeah, and I think another piece of the puzzle too is breaking the task or the goal down into smaller manageable pieces. We've said it before on this podcast. Don't try to eat the whole cow in one bite. Break it into smaller pieces so that you can get this small thing done and start getting the value from this small thing as you continue stacking up those small victories that add up to the achievement of your goal. I had this conversation actually yesterday with a really good friend who is a, entrepreneur, small business owner. She was looking to, do a huge project for her website. I mean, we're talking, credit card transactions, merch, message boarding, things behind paywall, user management. And when you think about that from a website perspective, that's a huge project. And what she was struggling with was getting her mind around the entire project. I was like, well, let's break it down into smaller pieces and talk about, all right, what's going to bring you the most value first? Let's break that down into a small manageable chunk so you can go ahead and get that done. And I think that's a good way for us to start making that progress. We may not have the whole thing figured out, but we know that we can get value from doing at least this part and getting some forward momentum.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Um, just finding a place to start,
Mhm.
I think is really important. And then, building on that, um, start small, let it grow. Um, but I think the important thing is that you make a decision that you need to you need to not wait. You need to start. You need to do something. And along with that, we talked earlier about if your goal, or if this thing that you want to do or want to accomplish, and it can be professional or personal, if it's something that actually matters, you need to put some time on it. You need to put a date on it. You need to make a commitment somehow, that puts you in a position to see that commitment and give you a better chance to follow through on it. And so, one of the ways to do that is putting it on a calendar, right?
Mhm.
Um, whether it's to start or whether you have incremental steps that you want to achieve along the way, putting a date and time on those and putting them on the calendar can help you stay on track, give you some personal accountability to reaching your end goal.
Yeah. Time bound. That's the T inside of our SMART goals that we talked about in the New Year's resolutions episode earlier this year. Putting some time bounds on it, time commitment is huge. Before we started recording today, you and I were talking about, a race that I have coming up in October. I've got a half marathon coming up in October and I've got to train for it. Well, guess what? To make sure that I stay on schedule with my training, I have a very detailed training calendar where I've got times and mileage that I've got to run between now and October in order to be ready for that race. Because if I didn't put it on the calendar, guess what? Something else is going to slide in and occupy that space. So it's like, oh, something's going to pop up. Hey, Frankie, are you available to do this? Oh, yeah, there's nothing on my calendar. Let's go. And then next thing you know, I've wasted 3 or 4 weeks in my training schedule. So there's power in writing things down. And there's power about uh, talking about it with other people, whether it's accountability partners or just the person that you're planning to interact with. State your intention so that other folks can help you to be accountable. One of the things, as we're drawing close to the end of the conversation here, the one of the things that was really impactful in one of my past roles was a book called The Dream Manager by Matthew Kelly. And there was an activity at the end of this book where it challenged you to get a piece of notebook paper and write down 100 dreams that you have. It could be anything. You don't constrain yourself by finance or anything like that. It doesn't have to be something that you can actually do, but what are just 100 dreams that you have, 100 goals that you want to achieve, and then break them down into these 12 categories. So I did that, and with the teams that reported to me, we actually had once a quarter, we would have what we called a dream manager session, where we would all sit down and we would talk about our list. Like, all right, here are the things, they could be personal and professional. Here are the things that I'm trying to work on right now, and these are the things I want to start working on really soon. So writing it down and committing and having others involved in your commitment and knowing about it is a great way to maintain accountability for progress.
Good stuff. Good stuff. And just remember, like the perfect time doesn't exist. Now is the perfect time, whether you realize it or not. Now is the perfect time to get started. And I agree with sharing those thoughts with others to help with your accountability. Um, that's always helpful. And the other thing I want to mention is, you know, we got to go beyond just writing them on the calendar. Like you talked about the training schedule that you put on the calendar. You know that at certain days and times that you have to, run a certain distance or what have you. Don't just put it on the calendar as, pretty iconic messages. Um, Put it on the calendar and commit to using that time to accomplish that piece of the goal that you have.
Absolutely. It doesn't mean anything without follow through.
So our challenge for our audience this week, Frankie, is to have our audience identify at least one thing that they have filed under the someday um, category, something that's on that eighth day of the week that we know doesn't exist. Let's slide that item into the 7 days and see if we can't get it done. But, write it down. It could be, launching a business. It could be writing a book. It could be having a conversation, taking your significant other on a date night, whatever it is, right? Let's put it on a calendar and commit to that. And then, um, challenge yourself to follow through on that. And if it means, as Frankie has alluded to, making it known, making it public, if you will, that that's something that you're going to accomplish, then do that. But make a commitment to yourself, challenge yourself to identify one thing that you're going to do this week to either accomplish or to make a start towards something bigger that you haven't.
Yeah. Someday is not coming. Someday is never coming. Go now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we have come to the end of this podcast, and I think it's been a very good conversation. Frankie, it's always a pleasure to sit here with you in this space and to have some back and forth, and hopefully give our audience some nuggets that they can take away. And I'm always enlightened by some of the nuggets that you share, so I really appreciate you for that. And before we leave this space, if you wouldn't mind, sir, telling our audience where they can find us through the week and participate in some of the conversations that we're having now and any previous conversations that we've had.
Absolutely, sir. So for anything PSI Effect podcast related, go to our website. This is psipod.com. There you'll find links to all the episodes, all the different places where you can subscribe to our audio podcast, Amazon, Spotify, Apple Podcast, all the podcast distributors. Subscribe now so you don't miss an episode. You can also see the full videos of these episodes on YouTube. You can search the PSI Effect podcast or use our handle at This Is PSI Pod. And you can use that same handle for YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok at This Is PSI Pod. So you can see all of the things happening in the PSI Effect universe.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. And thank you to our audience. I just want to say our following is growing. The numbers of our followers are growing. Please let the next one be you. And just remember that setbacks are temporary and comebacks are legendary. And until next time, go out there and be brave and rise on purpose.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the PSI Effect Podcast. This show doesn't happen without you, and you can connect with us via Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. Visit our website at thisispsipod.com and find us on YouTube and social media at This Is PSI Pod. That's at This Is PSI Pod. Until next time, remember, be brave and rise on purpose.